Imagine waking up one morning with no calendar on your wall, no clock by your bed, no way of knowing when the seasons would shift or the rains would come. For our ancient ancestors, this wasn't just a thought experiment, it was daily life. Time was a mystery, woven into the fabric of the natural world, but impossible to grasp fully, unpredictable, and often unforgiving. The sun rose and set, the moon waxed and waned, but without a system to make sense of these cycles, planning ahead was a constant challenge. Planting crops, organizing trade, even marking sacred days, all of it rested on uncertain ground. Then something extraordinary happened. In the heart of what we now call the Middle East, a civilization began pressing marks into soft clay, and in doing so, they began to press order onto chaos. These weren't just any marks, they were the beginnings of a system that would allow humanity, for the very first time, to track the future. These clay tablets, often no larger than the palm of your hand, became the world's first calendars, the first astronomical records, the first step toward a shared understanding of time itself. For thousands of years, they lay buried beneath desert sands, holding secrets that would rewrite history. We're going to explore how these unassuming artifacts emerged from the dust to rewire human consciousness, shifting us from living purely in the present to anticipating, predicting, and ultimately shaping what was to come. This is the story of how ancient people learned to see patterns in the stars, to count the days between seasons, and to build a bridge between the known and the unknown, a bridge we still cross every time we check the date or set an alarm. What's truly remarkable is how much of our modern world still rests on the foundations laid by these early timekeepers. The way we divide the hour, the month, even the year, all of it can be traced back to the innovations captured in clay. This journey isn't just about ancient history, it's about the very nature of human curiosity and our timeless desire to make sense of the world around us. So settle in, open your mind, and let's travel back through the millennia to uncover how a handful of inscribed tablets didn't just track time, they helped invent the future. Long before any written language existed, people watched the sky. They noticed how the sun's path shifted across the horizon, how the moon cycled from a thin sliver to a brilliant full circle and back again, and how certain star patterns would vanish for months only to reappear right before the weather turned cold. These celestial rhythms became the world's first clock, a grand, natural timepiece that governed every aspect of life. A community might know to move to higher ground when a specific constellation was visible at dawn, or to begin preparing the soil when the days grew noticeably longer. But this system, while beautiful, was deeply flawed. A cloudy night could obscure the new moon, throwing off the start of a month. A late frost could arrive without warning, devastating a crop that was planted based on a best guess. Time was a fluid, unpredictable force, and living by its whims was a constant gamble. The shift from small, nomadic groups to larger, settled agricultural societies made this gamble unsustainable. When your entire survival depends on harvesting enough grain to last the winter or on having a surplus to trade with a neighboring village, close enough is not good enough. You need to know with as much certainty as possible the optimal window for planting. Religious ceremonies, often tied to solstices or equinoxes, required precise timing to maintain their sacred power and social order. A festival held on the wrong day was more than an inconvenience. It was a potential rift in the community's relationship with the divine. The pressure to solve this problem, to pin down the fluidity of time into something measurable and predictable, became one of the most urgent challenges early civilizations faced. This necessity sparked the first great revolution in human thought, the creation of the calendar. The earliest attempts were humble, often based on a single, repeating cycle. A tally of moons was a common starting point, giving rise to lunar months. Others tracked the sun's northward and southward journey, marking a solar year. But each system had its own shortcoming. 12 lunar months add up to only 354 days, falling out of sync with the 365-day solar year by 11 days annually. After just 3 years, your lunar calendar would be an entire month behind the seasons. Imagine planning a harvest festival for the autumn equinox, only to find yourself celebrating in what feels like the middle of summer. To bridge this gap, ancient timekeepers became innovators. They began to intercalate, to insert extra days or even entire months into their calendars to resynchronize the lunar and solar cycles. This was not a one-time fix but an ongoing process of observation and correction, a dialogue between the ideal system they were creating on the ground and the perfect, unwavering cycles they observed in the heavens. These first calendars were more than just practical tools. They were the earliest expressions of a fundamental human desire to impose order on chaos, to find patterns in the noise, and to reach into the future with a newfound sense of confidence and control. For centuries, the secrets of these ancient timekeepers remained buried, lost to the sands of the Middle East. The very existence of their sophisticated systems was nothing more than a faint echo in a few classical texts, more legend than history. That all changed in the 1840s and 50s, when a new breed of explorer, part adventurer, part scholar began to arrive in the regions that were once Mesopotamia. These archaeologists, armed with shovels and a relentless curiosity, started digging into massive, mysterious mounds that dotted the flat landscape. Locals called these hills tells, but they weren't natural formations. They were the layered ruins of immense cities, built and rebuilt over thousands of years, slowly buried by time. The most dramatic discoveries came from sites like Nineveh, the grand capital of the Assyrian Empire, and Uruk, one of the world's first great cities. As teams worked their way down through layers of history, they didn't find just crumbling walls or broken pottery. They began to uncover vast libraries, entire rooms filled with what looked at first like simple clay rocks. But on closer inspection, these rocks were covered in an intricate, geometric script, a language of wedges and lines pressed into the soft clay before it was baked hard in the sun or fired in a kiln. This was cuneiform, one of humanity's earliest writing systems. The sheer volume was staggering. Thousands upon thousands of these tablets were carefully excavated, each one a frozen moment of thought from over 3,000 years ago. Initially, the script was completely unreadable, a baffling puzzle. But through the brilliant, painstaking work of linguists like Henry Rawlinson, who studied the massive trilingual inscription on a cliff face at Behistun in Iran, the code was slowly cracked. As scholars learned to read Sumerian and Akkadian, the languages of ancient Mesopotamia, the true nature of these clay libraries was revealed. They weren't just administrative records, though there were plenty of those detailing shipments of grain or livestock. Mixed in were tablets of an entirely different nature. These were mathematical texts with complex calculations, astronomical diaries meticulously logging the movement of stars and planets, and intricate calendars that plotted the year with precision. The dry desert air of Iraq had acted as a perfect preservative, protecting these fragile clay records for millennia. If these same tablets had been buried in a wetter European climate, they would have dissolved into mud long ago. Their survival felt almost miraculous. One of the most significant finds was the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, a deliberate collection of knowledge from across his empire. Here, scribes had gathered and copied texts on every subject imaginable, creating a repository of ancient science. Archaeologists held in their hands the very textbooks that trained Babylonian astronomers, the original observation logs that tracked the cycle of Venus, the precise instructions for inserting an extra month into the calendar to keep it in sync with the seasons. This was more than just an archaeological triumph. It was a complete rewriting of history. Before these digs, the ancient Greeks were often credited as the founders of science and astronomy. But these dusty tablets proved that sophisticated scientific inquiry was flourishing more than 1,000 years earlier. The discovery showed a world where scholars used repetitive, careful observation to detect patterns in nature, developed complex mathematical models to predict those patterns, and then applied that knowledge to the practical needs of their society. It revealed an ingenuity and intellectual ambition that no one had fully appreciated, highlighting a foundational chapter in the human story that had been completely lost, waiting silently in the earth for its moment to be rediscovered and rewrite our understanding of time itself. But who were the individuals behind this intellectual revolution? They weren't lone geniuses working in isolation, but a highly trained class of professionals embedded in the very heart of power and worship, the Mesopotamian scribes. Imagine a young boy born into a privileged family, beginning his education not in reading and writing as we know it, but in the painstaking art of forming wedge-shaped marks on a damp clay tablet. His training was rigorous, often taking years to master the hundreds of complex cuneiform signs. He would learn long lists of words, mathematical tables for multiplication and division, and eventually the intricate movements of the celestial bodies. These scribes were the ancient world's data scientists, the human processors who turned raw observation into usable knowledge. Their workplace was typically a temple complex or a royal palace, institutions that had the most to gain from accurate timekeeping. For the temple, knowing the exact date of a religious festival was a matter of cosmic importance, a way to maintain favor with the gods. For the palace, predicting the optimal time for planting and harvesting was directly tied to the kingdom's economic health and stability. A good harvest meant full storehouses, happy citizens, and a strong army. The scribe served both masters, his stylus acting as a bridge between the earthly and the divine. His role was to observe, record, and calculate, creating a stable framework upon which the entire society could depend. The tools of their trade were simple yet profound: a reed stylus sharpened to a point and a tablet of moist clay. Each night, an astronomer scribe might station himself on a temple ziggurat, a towering stairway to the heavens, and watch the sky. He would note the first appearance of the new moon crescent, a sight that officially marked the beginning of a new month. He would track the steady march of planets against the backdrop of fixed stars, and he would log any unusual events, a comet, a meteor, or the ominous darkness of an eclipse. These were not casual notes, they were meticulous, standardized records, often kept over generations, creating a priceless long-term dataset. This daily grind of observation was then transformed through mathematics. Using their sophisticated base 60 number system, which why we still have 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute today, these scribes calculated cycles. They figured out that 19 solar years almost exactly equaled 235 lunar months, a pattern known as the Metonic cycle that became the key to synchronizing their calendars. They could predict the approximate timing of lunar eclipses by recognizing the Saros cycle, a repetition of eclipses every 18 years. Their clay tablets are filled with these calculations, step-by-step instructions that look less like mystical prophecies and more like early scientific equations. The output of their work was intensely practical. One set of tablets might instruct farmers: when the constellation Pleiades rises heliacally for the first time just before dawn, it is time to begin the spring sowing. Another tablet, written for the king, might warn of a potential eclipse, an event seen as a dire omen that could destabilize the population, allowing the palace to prepare its public response. The scribes created almanacs that organized the year into a rhythm of duties, festivals, and agricultural activities, bringing a predictable order to the chaos of nature. In doing so, these ancient scholars did more than just keep time. They built the foundational principles of empirical science, observation, recording, and prediction, laying down a cornerstone for all the astronomy and timekeeping that would follow for millennia to come. So the system these scribes perfected was at its heart a lunar calendar. It was a beautifully intuitive way to mark the passage of time, rooted in the most visible and reliable celestial clock they had, the moon. Every month began not with a date on a page, but with a collective act of observation. Temple lookouts would scan the western horizon at dusk, searching for the faintest silver sliver of the new moon crescent. The first confirmed sighting was a moment of civic and religious importance, heralding the start of a new month. That month would then unfold over either 29 or 30 days, a period that closely mirrors the moon's actual 29.5-day cycle around the Earth. This lunar rhythm was woven into the very language and culture of Mesopotamia. The word for month, Ahu, was also the word for moon. For organizing a society's short-term activities, this system was remarkably effective. It created a predictable pattern of weeks and months that could dictate market days, religious ceremonies, and legal deadlines. But for any civilization that relies on agriculture, a calendar must do more than just count days. It must accurately reflect the seasons. And here, the elegant lunar system revealed a fundamental flaw. While 12 of these lunar months neatly add up to 354 days, the Earth's journey around the Sun, the true measure of the seasonal year, takes approximately 365.25 days. This created an annual deficit of about 11 days. At first, this discrepancy seems small, almost negligible, but time is cumulative and small errors grow into massive problems. Imagine you're a farmer following this lunar calendar. You plant your barley in the month designated as the start of spring. The first year, everything is fine. The second year, you plant 11 days later relative to the sun, but the seasons haven't shifted that much yet. By the third year, you're planting nearly a month later than the original calendar intended. After about 9 years, your spring planting festival would be occurring in the heat of summer, and your autumn harvest celebrations would be taking place in the dead of winter. The calendar, which was supposed to be a guide to the seasons, would have completely divorced itself from reality. The rhythm of civic and religious life would fall into chaos, and the all-important agricultural cycle would be thrown into disarray. The calendar, meant to reduce uncertainty, would itself become a source of profound confusion. Faced with this creeping chaos, the Mesopotamian scribes didn't abandon their system. Instead, they engineered a brilliant and flexible solution, the intercalary month. This was a 13th month, inserted into the calendar every few years to act as a reset button, pushing the lunar count back into alignment with the solar seasons. Deciding when to add this extra month was not a random act. It was the pinnacle of the scribes' astronomical and mathematical skill. They needed a rule, a predictable pattern they could observe in the heavens. One of the key methods involved watching the star we know as Sirius. In Mesopotamia, its first pre-dawn appearance, known as its heliacal rising, occurred around the time of the summer solstice. If the scribes observed that this celestial event was happening too early or too late relative to their lunar calendar, they knew it was time to intercalate. Over centuries, they refined this process from an ad hoc correction into a sophisticated cycle. They discovered that over a period of 19 years, the sun and moon almost perfectly realign. This period, known today as the Metonic cycle, contains 235 lunar months. This meant that within those 19 years, they needed to add 7 extra months to make the numbers work. So their system evolved from reactive observation to proactive prediction. They could now plan ahead, knowing that in years 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19 of the cycle, an extra month would be added. This wasn't just administrative paperwork, it was a monumental achievement in pattern recognition, a testament to their deep understanding that true timekeeping wasn't about slavishly following one cycle, but about harmonizing multiple, competing rhythms of the cosmos. They learned to bend the moon's time to the sun's rule, creating a hybrid system that gave their society the best of both worlds: the short-term precision of the moon and the long-term stability of the sun. While the Sumerians laid the essential groundwork, it was the Babylonians who truly elevated timekeeping from a practical art to a predictive science, transforming it into something that could not just track time, but truly foresee it. They inherited the lunar calendar and the need for intercalation, but they approached the problem with a newfound mathematical rigor that set them apart. Their goal was no longer just to fix the calendar after it had drifted. It was to build a system so robust and so deeply understood that the drift could be anticipated and corrected before it even became a problem. This shift from reactive observation to proactive prediction marks one of the most significant intellectual leaps in human history, and it was all made possible by their relentless dedication to recording data and searching for patterns over generations. Their most profound innovation was the development of mathematical astronomy. Instead of viewing each celestial event as a unique omen from the gods, Babylonian scholars began to treat them as phenomena governed by repeating, calculable cycles. They pored over centuries of observational records, the cumulative work of countless scribes, and discovered something astonishing: the cosmos was predictable. They identified the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years after which the sun, moon, and earth returned to nearly the same relative geometry, resulting in a similar pattern of eclipses. If a total lunar eclipse occurred on a specific date, they could be highly confident that another one would occur 18 years and 11 days later. This wasn't magic or guesswork, it was the result of meticulous data analysis. Their clay tablets are filled with long lists of eclipses and the complex, step-by-step arithmetical procedures used to compute their future occurrence, creating what were essentially the world's first astronomical almanacs. This mathematical mindset bled into every aspect of their system, including their fundamental units of measurement. Needing a highly divisible number for their complex base 60 calculations, they made a choice that would echo for millennia. They divided the circle into 360 degrees. This number was perfect for their purposes, as it can be evenly divided by a staggering number of integers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 12, and so on. This same logical approach was applied to the day. They took the period from one sunrise to the next and divided it into 12 equal parts, which we now call hours. They further divided each hour into 60 minutes and each minute into 60 seconds, creating the precise temporal architecture that still structures every single one of our days. Every time you check your watch or navigate using degrees on a map, you are using a system invented by Babylonian mathematicians over 3,000 years ago. The evidence for this sophisticated system is preserved in specific, famous series of tablets. The most comprehensive of these was the Enuma Anu in Lil, a massive collection of 70 tablets containing thousands of celestial omens and the mathematical rules for interpreting them. This was the definitive textbook for Babylonian scholars. Another critical set, known today as the Astronomical Diaries, provides a continuous record of night-by-night observations spanning centuries, noting planetary positions, weather, river levels, and even commodity prices, linking events in the sky directly to those on Earth. The pinnacle of their predictive power is demonstrated by tablets like the Venus tablet of Amasajuka, which we'll explore in detail next, which contains a 21-year record of the planet Venus's appearances and disappearances, allowing priests to forecast its movements with stunning accuracy. These weren't just lists, they were working documents, the tools of a professional class of astronomers who could provide their king and their society with a reliable forecast of the future, turning the terrifying uncertainty of time into a known quantity, and in doing so, laying the very foundations of modern science. Of all the astronomical tablets to emerge from the ruins of Mesopotamia, few capture the Babylonian genius for blending precise science with deep mythology, quite like the Venus tablet of Amasajuka. This particular artifact, a clay tablet inscribed with careful cuneiform, is far more than a simple logbook. It is a sophisticated predictive engine. It documents the risings and settings of the planet Venus over a 21-year period during the reign of King Amasajuka, who ruled in the 17th century before the Common Era. The copy we have today dates to the 7th century before the Common Era, meaning it was carefully preserved and recopied by scribes for 1,000 years, a testament to its immense perceived value. For the Babylonian astronomers, Venus was not merely a bright point of light. It was the celestial embodiment of the goddess Ishtar, a powerful and complex deity of love, war, and fertility. Her movements across the sky were seen as direct messages concerning the king's health, the fate of harvests, and the outcome of impending battles. The tablet itself is a masterclass in data organization. It doesn't just list events, it presents them in a clear, repeating pattern that reveals the planet's complex rhythm. Venus goes through cycles where it is visible as the evening star, setting after the sun, and then it disappears from view for a period before reappearing as the morning star, rising before the dawn. The tablet meticulously records the dates of these first and last visibilities, the durations of visibility, and the periods of disappearance. What makes this truly revolutionary is that the Babylonians didn't just see these as isolated events. By tracking them over this long 21-year cycle, they identified the pattern. They realized that the behavior of Venus is periodic and predictable. Once you have a full cycle of data, you can use it to forecast the planet's behavior far into the future. This predictive power had a profound dual purpose. On one hand, it was an astonishing scientific achievement, a mathematical model of planetary motion created over a millennium before Ptolemy. The scribes could inform the court when Ishtar would next appear in the morning sky or vanish from the evening sky, not as a guess but as a calculated certainty. This knowledge transformed the terrifying unknown of the cosmos into something manageable and predictable. On the other hand, this scientific data was the raw material for divination. Each specific movement was interpreted as an omen. The tablet is filled with conditional statements. If Venus appears on a certain date, then there will be a plague in a certain land. If it is bright when it rises, then the harvest will be abundant. The astronomers were essentially providing an early warning system, allowing the king and his priests to perform rituals to avert potential disasters or to prepare for coming prosperity. This seamless fusion is the tablet's true legacy. There was no conflict between the mathematical calculation and the mythological interpretation. They were two sides of the same coin. The Babylonians saw the universe as a single, interconnected whole where the divine will was expressed through perfectly regular, observable natural laws. By cracking the mathematical code of the heavens, they believed they were deciphering the intentions of the gods themselves. The Venus tablet of Amasajuka stands as a powerful symbol of this worldview, a tangible record of the moment humanity realized that the future was not entirely written in cryptic, random signs, but in a repeating, calculable pattern waiting to be read by those with the patience and intellect to look. This drive to find order in the heavens led the Babylonians to one of their most enduring and influential creations, the division of the sky into the 12 signs of the Zodiac. It began not as a tool for personal fortune-telling, but as a practical solution for a very specific astronomical problem. They needed a consistent reference system to track the wandering paths of the planets against the seemingly fixed backdrop of stars. To do this, they identified a band of the sky, a path that the sun, moon, and planets all seem to travel through. They then divided this celestial highway into 12 equal sections, each spanning 30 degrees, and each named after the most prominent constellation within that segment. This ecliptic path became a cosmic ruler, a standardized grid against which they could measure and record the precise location of any celestial body at any given time. It was a brilliant piece of intellectual cartography, turning the vast, overwhelming dome of the night sky into a manageable, coordinate-based map. The names they gave these sections, drawn from their rich mythology and the shapes they saw in the stars, are still familiar to us today. Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins, and so on. This system allowed for unprecedented precision in their astronomical diaries. A scribe could now note that Jupiter was located in the middle of the constellation of the Scales, or that the moon had entered the domain of the Lion. This wasn't just poetic language, it was a precise scientific notation. The Zodiac provided a common vocabulary for the cosmos, enabling the accumulation and sharing of knowledge across generations of scholars. It was the essential framework that made their complex mathematical predictions of planetary motion possible, anchoring their calculations to a fixed, observable reality. But for the Babylonians, the movement of celestial bodies was never just a mechanical process. It was a divine drama unfolding in real time. The planets were not balls of rock and gas. They were living gods Marduk, Ishtar, Ninurta journeying across the sky. Therefore, their positions within this newly mapped zodiac were rich with meaning. If the god of war, Nergal, was particularly bright in the section of the Scorpion, it might be interpreted as an omen of a coming military victory or defeat. This practice, known as mundane astrology, was primarily concerned with the fate of the king and the state. The celestial omens were used to guide high-level decisions about agriculture, warfare, and public policy, all in an effort to maintain harmony between the earthly kingdom and the cosmic order. The truly revolutionary shift, however, came later during the Persian or Hellenistic period, when this system of celestial meaning was personalized. Babylonian scholars began to experiment with the idea that the specific configuration of the sky at the moment of a person's birth could influence their character and destiny. The earliest known example of this is a clay tablet from the 4th century before the Common Era, which uses the position of the planets to create a rudimentary personality profile for a child. This was the humble, clay-bound birth of the horoscope. It marked a profound transfer of cosmic influence from the broad scale of kingdoms and harvests down to the intimate scale of the individual human life. For the first time in history, the stars were thought to tell a story not just about empires but about you. While modern astrology is often dismissed as pseudoscience, its ancient Babylonian roots reveal something much deeper than superstition. They reveal a fundamental and deeply human quest to find our place within a vast and often intimidating universe. The clay tablets that document the development of the zodiac show a civilization trying to connect the dots, to weave the predictable, mathematical rhythms of the planets together with the unpredictable narrative of human experience. They saw the cosmos as a single, interconnected text, and the zodiac was their key to reading it. This desire to find patterns and derive meaning is a powerful force that continues to drive scientific inquiry today. In a very real way, the Babylonian impulse to map the sky and seek its secrets is the same impulse that leads modern astrophysicists to map the cosmic microwave background radiation. The methods and conclusions have radically changed, but the underlying human yearning to understand our relationship with the cosmos, that began with scribes pressing constellations into wet clay under the Mesopotamian night sky. Yet while Babylonian scholars were perfecting their lunar solar system under the clear skies of Mesopotamia, another great civilization to the west was wrestling with the same cosmic challenges, but with a very different landscape as its guide. The ancient Egyptians were also master timekeepers, but their rhythm was set not by the moon's phases, but by the life-giving, predictable pulse of the Nile River. Each year, the river would flood, spreading rich, black silt across the farmland in an event so crucial they named their entire year after it, the inundation. Predicting this flood was a matter of survival, and they noticed a powerful correlation. The flood's arrival coincided with the heliacal rising of the star we call Sirius, which appeared just before dawn after a period of invisibility. This celestial event became their anchor, their New Year's alarm clock, and it set them on a path to develop one of the most elegant and stable calendars of the ancient world. The system they created was a masterwork of solar simplicity. They observed that the Nile's flood cycle, and indeed the entire seasonal round, neatly fit into a period of 365 days. So they built their civil calendar around this solar year, dividing it into 3 seasons of 4 months, each: inundation, emergence, and harvest. Each month was given 30 days, resulting in a clean 360 days. But they were astute observers. They knew the year was slightly longer. Rather than wrestling with complex lunar intercalations, they made a brilliantly straightforward decision. They simply added 5 extra days at the end of the year. These were the epagomenal days, considered to be the birthdays of the gods, a time outside of normal time that completed the solar cycle. This 365-day calendar was remarkably stable, drifting by only 1 day every 4 years, and it formed the incredibly durable backbone of Egyptian administrative and economic life for millennia. For a long time, historians believed this system emerged in a vacuum, a purely Egyptian innovation born from the unique conditions of the Nile Valley. But the discovery of ancient trade records and diplomatic correspondence tells a far more interconnected story. The Amarna letters, a trove of clay tablets written in cuneiform found in Egypt, reveal a vibrant exchange of ideas between the pharaoh's court and the kingdoms of Mesopotamia and the Levant. Diplomats, merchants, and scholars moved along well-established routes, carrying goods, languages, and knowledge. It is not difficult to imagine a Babylonian scholar, well-versed in the mathematics of the Enuma Anu Enlil, sharing concepts of celestial division with an Egyptian priest tasked with improving his own kingdom's calendar. The evidence suggests the Egyptians didn't simply copy a system. They engaged in a process of selective adoption, taking a concept and brilliantly adapting it to their own profound needs. The key difference lies in their priorities. The Babylonian system was exquisitely complex because it sought to harmonize 2 cycles, the moon and the sun, primarily for religious and astrological purposes, where the precise timing of lunar months was critical for rituals. The Egyptians, by contrast, needed a robust administrative tool for a state that depended on massive, coordinated agricultural efforts. Their solar calendar was less concerned with the moon's phases and more focused on the sun's unwavering path, which perfectly mirrored the predictable annual rise and fall of their river. They took the Mesopotamian idea of a structured, mathematical approach to time and applied it to create a tool of stunning bureaucratic efficiency. This beautiful adaptation shows that the spread of innovation is never a simple matter of imitation. It is a process of translation. A society takes a foreign idea and filters it through the lens of its own environment, its own gods, and its own most pressing needs, transforming it into something new and uniquely its own. The Egyptian calendar became so effective that its basic structure would later be adopted by Julius Caesar and form the foundation of the Julian calendar, which in turn evolved into the one we use today, creating a direct living link between the clay tablets of Mesopotamia and the calendar on your wall. Centuries later and a continent away, the intellectual torch first lit by Mesopotamian scribes was carried forward by a new generation of thinkers, the scholars of ancient Greece. They inherited not just ideas but a vast, tangible treasure trove of data. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, which itself had absorbed the knowledge of Babylon, he opened a floodgate of information. Greek astronomers suddenly had access to centuries of meticulous celestial observations, recorded on clay tablets and translated for their use. This wasn't just a collection of facts, it was a ready-made database, a historical record of the heavens that spanned generations. Greek science, with its strong philosophical bent toward developing grand, unifying theories about the nature of the cosmos, now had the raw empirical evidence it needed to test those theories and push them further than ever before. No one exemplifies this fusion of Babylonian data with Greek theory better than the astronomer Hipparchus, working on the island of Rhodes in the 2nd century before the Common Era. He is often credited with the discovery of the precession of the equinoxes, one of the most subtle and profound motions of the Earth. This is the slow, gradual wobble of the planet's axis, which causes the position of the equinoxes to shift backward through the zodiac over a cycle of about 26,000 years. To detect this incredibly slow drift, Hipparchus needed to compare his own precise observations of the stars with those made long before he was born. His crucial reference point was a Babylonian eclipse record from over a century and a half earlier. By comparing the recorded position of the moon during that ancient eclipse with its position in his own time, he was able to calculate that the stars had shifted by about 2 degrees. This monumental discovery that the supposedly fixed backdrop of the stars was itself in motion was only possible because a Babylonian scribe, over 150 years prior, had meticulously pressed the date and details of an eclipse into a clay tablet, never knowing how a future mind would use that information to rewrite humanity's understanding of the universe. The Greek adoption of Babylonian knowledge was both wholesale and innovative. They readily embraced the base 60 system, making the division of the circle into 360 degrees a standard feature of their geometry and astronomy, a convention that remains unchallenged to this day. But they were not mere passive recipients, they were brilliant refiners. They took the fundamental concepts and engineered them into more precise and sophisticated tools. The clepsydra, or water clock for instance, was known in Babylon and Egypt as a simple vessel that measured time by the drip of water. Greek engineers transformed it into a complex instrument of remarkable accuracy. They designed reservoirs with regulated flow, added gears and dials to display the time, and even created elaborate automata that would strike bells or enact little scenes on the hour. Similarly, they refined the sundial, moving beyond simple shadow sticks to design hemispherical dials and complex gnomons that could account for the changing altitude of the sun throughout the year, telling time with a precision that would have astounded their Mesopotamian predecessors. This cross-pollination of ideas created a powerful feedback loop of intellectual progress. The Babylonians provided the long-term, numerical data gathered through relentless observation. The Greeks provided the philosophical framework and geometric models to explain why the heavens moved as they did, A thinker like Claudius Ptolemy, working in Alexandria in the 2nd century of the Common Era, could then synthesize it all. In his monumental work, The Almagest, he constructed a complex mathematical model of the universe with Earth at its center, using epicycles and deference to explain the sometimes irregular paths of the planets. The predictive power of his model was rooted in the Babylonian data he had access to. This was not a case of one civilization simply replacing another. It was a continuous thread, a collaboration across time and culture. The Greek chapter in the story of timekeeping demonstrates that the greatest leaps in human understanding rarely occur in isolation. They are almost always the product of building upon the accumulated knowledge of those who came before, of taking the clay tablets of one age and using them to calculate a brighter, more comprehensible future for the next. As the light of the Roman Empire faded and Europe entered what later historians would call the Dark Ages, the grand, state-sponsored observatories and scholarly traditions of the ancient world seemed to vanish into the shadows. The intricate knowledge of the Babylonians and the complex models of the Greeks were in grave danger of being lost forever in the chaos of migration, war, and the collapse of centralized authority. But this priceless intellectual heritage did not disappear. It found a new and perhaps unexpected home within the high, thick walls of medieval monasteries. Isolated from the turmoil of the outside world, these religious communities became the new guardians of time, the quiet, steady heartbeat that kept the science of the calendar alive for centuries. The monk in his scriptorium, copying an ancient text by candlelight, became the direct successor to the Babylonian scribe pressing numbers into clay under the desert stars. The entire rhythm of monastic life was built upon a sacred schedule known as the canonical hours, a cycle of 8 prayer services that structured the day and night. This was far more than a simple devotional routine. It was a rigorous, all-encompassing timekeeping regime. The day began with matins, a service held in the deep darkness of the night, often around 2 or 3 in the morning. This was followed by lauds at dawn, prime in the early morning, and then terce, sext, and none marking the 3rd, 6th, and 9th hours of the daylight period. The day concluded with vespers at sunset and compline before bedtime. To adhere to this unyielding schedule, monasteries became centers of horological innovation. They relied on a combination of ancient tools, sundials for the day, water clocks for the night, and candle clocks that burned in marked sections. The constant need to know the hour, regardless of weather or season, turned these quiet cloisters into living laboratories for measuring time's passage. Their most formidable intellectual challenge, however, lay in managing the church's calendar, a complex mix of solar and lunar cycles that would have impressed even the most learned Babylonian astronomer. The crown jewel of this problem was the calculation of Easter, a movable feast whose date is determined by a set of rules that are dizzyingly complex. The Council of Nicaea in 325 had decreed that Easter must fall on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox. This single sentence created a puzzle that intertwined the 7-day week, the 29-and-a-half-day lunar month, and the 365-and-a-quarter-day solar year. Calculating it years in advance required a deep understanding of the very same metonic cycle the Babylonians had used to synchronize their calendars over 1,000 years earlier. To solve this, monasteries produced and meticulously copied elaborate tables known as Easter tables or computus manuals. These were sprawling works of practical mathematics that laid out the dates of Easter and all the other dependent movable feasts for decades, even centuries into the future. Creating them was a task for the most scholarly monks, who had to master the 19-year lunar cycle and understand the concept of the epoch, which is the age of the moon on the first day of the year. These tables are a direct and tangible link to the past. The methods they used, while framed in Christian terminology, were the direct descendants of the arithmetic and cyclical calculations found on Mesopotamian clay tablets. The monk calculating the epoch was, in his own way, performing the same function as the Babylonian scribe determining when to insert an intercalary month to keep the king's calendar aligned with the seasons. This relentless, meticulous work did more than just ensure that Pentecost was celebrated on the correct Sunday. It provided a continuous, unbroken thread of calendrical science through a period when so much other knowledge was being lost. The monasteries, as the sole centers of literacy and learning for much of the Middle Ages, became the indispensable bridge. They preserved not only the Christian liturgical calendar, but also the ancient Greek and Roman texts on astronomy and mathematics that had been translated into Latin, often with commentary added by the monks themselves. They kept the flame of empirical observation and precise calculation burning, not for profit or power, but for the glory of God and the orderly functioning of their worship. This quiet, persistent effort ensured that when Europe finally began to reawaken during the Carolingian Renaissance and later the Scientific Revolution, the foundational knowledge of timekeeping was still there, ready to be studied, challenged, and improved upon by a new generation of thinkers, forever connecting the ziggurats of Babylon to the soaring cathedrals of the medieval world. Across the globe, entirely isolated from the intellectual ferment of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, another civilization was achieving a parallel revolution in understanding time. In the dense rainforests and highlands of Mesoamerica, the Maya developed a calendar system so complex and so precise that it stands as one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the ancient world. Theirs was a cosmology where time itself was divine, a sacred force carried on the backs of gods, and their calendars were not merely tools for measurement but living maps of a rhythmic, cyclical universe. Without any known contact with the old world, they arrived at a similarly sophisticated need to harmonize celestial cycles with human activity, proving that the drive to track and predict the future is a universal thread in the human story. The core of their system rested on two interlocking calendars that worked in tandem, like gears in a magnificent cosmic clock. The first was the Hob, a 365-day solar year that closely mirrored the agricultural and seasonal cycles so vital to their survival. It was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, with a final, abbreviated 5-day period known as the Wayeb. These 5 days were considered extremely dangerous, a time when the veil between the mortal world and the spirit realm was thin, and ill fortune could easily seep through. People would often stay indoors, avoiding any significant activities or risks, treating this period with a solemnity that highlights how deeply their concept of time was intertwined with spiritual belief. The Hob provided the practical, earthly framework for knowing when to plant maize, when to expect the rains, and when to prepare for the harvest. Meshing perfectly with this solar cycle was the second calendar, the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred round that had no obvious correlation to any astronomical cycle. This is where the Maya system reveals its unique, profound character. The Tzolk'in was composed of 20-day names like Imik's crocodile, Ik wind, or Akbal night, that cycled alongside 13 numbers. Think of it as two interconnected wheels, one with 20 cogs and one with 13. A specific day would be a combination of a number and a name, such as 8 Bien or 1 Adjor. It takes 260 unique days for the two wheels to realign and for a specific combination like 1 Imix to repeat. This 260-day cycle was the heartbeat of Maya ritual life, governing the scheduling of ceremonies, determining the auspiciousness of days for everything from marriage to warfare, and defining the personal spiritual identity of individuals. The true genius of the system emerges when you see how these two calendars were used together. Any given day had a date in both the Hob and the Tzolk'in. This combination, known as the calendar round, creates a cycle that only repeats every 52 years, which is the amount of time it takes for a specific Hob and Tzolk'in date to coincide again. This 52-year cycle was of immense significance across Mesoamerica, marking a complete renewal of time. At its conclusion, the Maya would extinguish old fires and ceremonially kindle new ones, symbolizing the rebirth of the world and the hope that the sun would continue its journey. This interlocking system allowed for an incredibly nuanced view of time, where a day's significance was not defined by a single measure but by its unique position within multiple overlapping cycles. Yet, for all its complexity, the calendar round was still a cyclical system that repeated every 52 years, for recording history on a grand, linear scale, for inscribing the reigns of kings and the founding of cities on a timeline stretching back to a mythical beginning. The Maya developed their most awe-inspiring innovation, the long count. This was a calendar that counted the days, literally, from a fixed starting point that scholars believe corresponds to August 11th, 3,114 years before the Common Era in our Gregorian system. This date was not arbitrary, it was their creation date, the day the current world was brought into being. The long count is a base 20 system that measures time in escalating units, much like our own system of seconds, minutes, and hours, but on a vastly larger scale. The basic unit was the Kain, or 1 day. 20 Kains made a winnel 20 days, 18 winnels made a ton 360 days, close to a year, 20 tons made a Katon about 20 years, and 20 Katons made a Bacton about 394 years. A long count date would read something like 9, 14, 12, 4, 18, specifying the number of Bactons, Katons, tons, winnels, and Kains that had elapsed since the dawn of the current creation. This allowed them to place any event on an absolute, linear timeline stretching thousands of years into the past and future with pinpoint accuracy. The famous so-called end date of December 21, 2012, was simply the completion of a 13-Bacton cycle, a moment of immense cosmic transition and renewal in their belief, not a prophecy of doom. The fact that the Maya, separated by oceans from the Babylonians, developed a system of such parallel sophistication is a powerful testament to a shared human consciousness. Both civilizations, though using different materials, clay in one case, carved stone stelae and bark paper codices in the other, sought to achieve the same goal, to tame the chaos of time by finding its underlying mathematical order. They both recognized that human flourishing depended on this knowledge, whether it was a Babylonian king using an eclipse prediction to maintain power or a Maya Ajor, a holy lord, using the sacred Tzolk'in to validate his right to rule by aligning his coronation with a propitious day. Their methods were a unique response to their own environment and cosmology, but their triumph was the same. They both learned to read the language of the universe, written in the movements of the heavens and the turning of the seasons, and in doing so, they gave their people the most powerful tool of all, the ability to see deep into the future and plan accordingly. This newfound ability to predict the seasons did far more than just fill granaries. It fundamentally rewired the very structure of society. In the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the success of a harvest was the difference between a thriving city and a ghost town. A failed crop meant famine, economic collapse, and the very real threat of invasion from desperate neighbors. Before the development of reliable calendars, farmers had to rely on a combination of guesswork, inherited folk wisdom, and immediate environmental cues, the budding of a certain tree, the behavior of a specific bird species. These methods were vulnerable to the whims of an unusually early frost or a delayed seasonal rain, leaving entire communities perilously exposed to the elements. The creation of a lunisolar calendar synchronized with the stars changed everything. It gave farmers a shared, objective schedule, a celestial roadmap for the entire agricultural year that was independent of any single, potentially misleading natural sign. We can see this practical wisdom etched directly into the clay tablets themselves. These were not abstract astronomical treatises meant only for priests and kings. Many were straightforward farmers' almanacs written in clear, instructional language. One tablet might explicitly state, "When the constellation of the plough appears in the evening sky, it is time to sharpen your plowshares and prepare the oxen." Another would command, "Begin the sowing of barley when the Pleiades star cluster makes its first pre-dawn appearance." This was actionable intelligence derived from generations of meticulous sky watching. The tablets also contained guidance based on longer cycles, advising on crop rotation and fallow periods to maintain soil fertility, understanding that the land itself operated on a timetable that needed to be respected. This knowledge transformed farming from a reactive struggle against nature into a proactive, planned enterprise. A community that knew with high confidence the optimal window for planting could coordinate its labor force, manage its water resources through irrigation canals, and maximize its yield, creating a surplus that became the engine of civilization. That surplus is the critical link between the calendar and the rise of complex society. When a community consistently produces more food than it immediately needs, everything changes. Not everyone needs to be a farmer. This food surplus allows for the specialization of labor, the true hallmark of an advanced civilization. Suddenly, you can have full-time artisans who craft sophisticated pottery and tools, soldiers who dedicate themselves to defense and conquest, merchants who organize trade networks to bring in exotic goods, and scribes and priests who can focus on administration, religion, and further scientific study. The entire intricate social hierarchy of ancient Mesopotamia, from the king and his court down to the humblest laborer, was built upon the foundation of a reliable food supply, which was itself made possible by accurate timekeeping. The calendar, in a very real sense, invented the bureaucrat, the blacksmith, and the astronomer. This stability also fueled monumental architecture and long-term projects. Planning and building a ziggurat, a massive temple complex, or an extensive irrigation network are endeavors that take years, even decades. They require a society confident in its ability to feed the thousands of workers involved, not just for one season, but for many seasons to come. A precise calendar provided that confidence. It allowed for multi-year planning, for setting deadlines and allocating resources across a timeline that stretched far beyond the current harvest. The ability to collectively look years into the future and act on that vision is a profound cognitive leap, one that separates simple settlements from great civilizations. The clay tablets, therefore, are more than just early scientific instruments. They are the project management software of the ancient world, the tools that enabled humanity to conceive of and execute grand visions that would outlive any single individual. By reducing the existential uncertainty of tomorrow, they unlocked the potential for humanity to build for a future they could now see. For the ancient mind, the calendar was never a mere utility. It was a sacred covenant, a divinely ordained schedule that synchronized human activity with the will of the gods. In Mesopotamia, time itself was a pantheon. Each month was not just a block of days, but the personal domain of a specific deity, and the start of a new month, marked by the first sighting of the crescent moon, was a moment of profound religious significance. The month of Nisanu, for instance, was sacred to the great god Anu, king of the heavens. and it kicked off with the Akitu Festival, a 12-day-long New Year celebration that was the most important event in the Mesopotamian ritual calendar. This was not a simple party. It was a complex series of ceremonies, processions, and reenactments designed to ensure the gods would renew their favor for the coming year, guaranteeing the fertility of the land and the stability of the king's rule. To get the timing wrong was not an administrative error. It was a cosmic offense, a risk of plunging the entire society into divine disfavor. This is where the partnership between the temple astronomer and the high priest became the most critical alliance in the kingdom. The astronomer, with his meticulously kept clay tablets of celestial data, provided the raw scientific facts, the precise expected time of the lunar crescent, the trajectory of Venus, the potential for an eclipse. The priest then interpreted this data through a spiritual lens, determining the most auspicious moments for each ritual action. A surviving tablet might instruct that a specific sacrifice must be performed when the sun stands in the middle of the sky on the 5th day of a particular month, or that a procession should begin at the moment the star of Ishtar becomes visible in the west. They understood that the gods communicated through the flawless, predictable mechanics of the heavens. A solar eclipse was a terrifying message from the sun god Shamash, while the steady, reliable return of the constellation of the plough was a benevolent promise from the agricultural goddess Nisaba. By aligning their ceremonies with these celestial events, they were essentially answering the gods in their own language, demonstrating their piety through precise observation. This fusion created a powerful feedback loop that drove scientific discovery. The religious need for perfect ritual timing provided the constant, funded motivation for centuries of astronomical observation. Why spend generations carefully recording the motion of a planet like Mars? Because its movements were believed to foretell the fate of the king and the outcomes of wars. The need to predict an eclipse was urgent because it was seen as a direct threat to the ruler, requiring protective incantations and substitute king rituals to avert disaster. The clay tablets are filled with these omens. If the moon is eclipsed on the 1st day of the month, the king will die, the land will be in rebellion. This might sound like superstition to us, but for them, it was a risk management strategy of the highest order. It meant that the scholar in the temple was not just a stargazer. He was a vital national security asset, using mathematics to divine the intentions of the gods and provide the king with an early warning system. The relentless pursuit of predictive accuracy, fueled by spiritual fear and divine aspiration, is what led to the groundbreaking discovery of the Saros cycle for eclipses and the Metonic cycle for harmonizing the sun and moon. In this world, the highest science was in the service of the highest gods, and every calculation was an act of devotion, ensuring that human time remained in step with cosmic time. So the meticulous work of the Babylonian astronomers and the solar-centric approach of the Egyptians did not vanish with their empires. Instead, this accumulated knowledge traveled west, finding a new patron in one of history's most ambitious and powerful states, the Roman Republic. By the 1st century before the Common Era, the Roman calendar was in a state of complete disarray. It was a messy, politically manipulated lunar system that had drifted so far out of sync with the seasons that the month meant for spring was actually occurring in the heart of winter. The situation had become so dysfunctional that it was undermining agricultural planning and even the scheduling of military campaigns. It was into this chaos that Julius Caesar stepped, armed with a solution forged not in Rome, but in the intellectual traditions of the ancient Near East. During his campaigns in Egypt, Caesar had been deeply impressed by the elegant stability of the Egyptian solar calendar. He consulted with the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, a scholar steeped in the Hellenistic tradition that itself was built upon Babylonian foundations. Together, they designed a radical reform, the new Julian calendar, introduced in 45 before the Common Era, was a monumental shift. It discarded the unreliable Roman moon and fully embraced the sun, creating a year of 365 days with a simple, brilliant rule to handle the extra quarter day: add one extra day every 4 years. This was the leap year, a concept that finally gave the wandering fractional day a permanent home. The calendar was so effective at restoring order that it spread throughout the vast Roman Empire, becoming the standard timekeeping tool for the Western world for over 16 centuries. Yet, even Caesar's sophisticated system had a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw. The solar year is not exactly 365 and a quarter days long. It is about 11 minutes shorter. Over centuries, those 11 minutes per year began to add up. By the 1500s, the Julian calendar had drifted by about 10 days. The vernal equinox, which was supposed to fall on March 21st and was critically important for calculating the date of Easter, was now occurring around March 11th. This was more than an astronomical curiosity. For the Catholic Church, it was a theological crisis. The most sacred holiday was slowly slipping away from its proper place in the seasonal cycle. Pope Gregory XIII decided a correction was necessary, launching the next great reform. A commission of astronomers and clerics was assembled, and their work resulted in the Gregorian calendar, introduced in 1582. Their solution was a masterstroke of precision. To fix the immediate 10-day drift, they simply deleted them. In that year, the day after October 4th was declared October 15th, resetting the equinox. To prevent the drift from happening again, they refined the leap year rule. A year would be a leap year if divisible by 4, but not if divisible by 100, unless it was also divisible by 400. This means the year 2000 was a leap year, but the year 1900 was not. This adjustment made the calendar accurate to within 1 day every 3,300 years. The new system was gradually adopted by Catholic countries and then slowly, often reluctantly, by Protestant and Orthodox nations over the following centuries, eventually becoming the global civil calendar we all use today. What's truly remarkable is the unbroken lineage connecting your modern desk calendar to those ancient clay tablets. The 7-day week we follow is a direct inheritance from the Babylonians, who assigned each day to one of the 7 celestial bodies they knew. The division of the day into 24 hours and each hour into 60 minutes is their base 60 system in action. The very concept of a solar year with periodic corrections is a principle they perfected. The Gregorian reform was not a rejection of the past, but a refinement of it, a testament to the enduring power of the foundational ideas first pressed into wet clay thousands of years earlier. Our modern timekeeping is a living museum, a seamless blend of Babylonian mathematics, Egyptian solar observation, Roman imperial administration, and medieval church scholarship, all working in silent harmony to tell us what day it is. But perhaps the most profound legacy of all is not a specific number or a unit of measure, but the very methodology they pioneered. The Babylonian approach to astronomy was fundamentally empirical. They were not philosophers in the Greek tradition, constructing grand geometric models of the cosmos based on first principles. They were data scientists, gathering centuries of nightly observations and then using sophisticated mathematics to find the patterns hidden within that massive dataset. This commitment to empirical evidence, recorded faithfully on clay, provided the raw material for later revolutions. When the Greek astronomer Hipparchus needed to discover the precession of the equinoxes, he didn't have to stare at the sky for a lifetime. He could compare his own observations with the Babylonian records from over a century before. That long-term dataset was the key that unlocked one of the Earth's most subtle motions. This establishes a direct, unbroken lineage from the scribes of Nineveh to the scientists at NASA, all of whom share the same core belief that the universe operates on predictable, mathematical principles, and that by patiently collecting and analyzing data, we can learn to read its deepest secrets. Every time a modern astrophysicist uses data from a satellite to test a theory about dark matter or the expansion of the universe, they are working in a tradition that began with a scholar on a ziggurat, a stylus in one hand and a wet clay tablet in the other, patiently counting the days and watching the stars, building a future they could only dream of. For over 2,000 years, the secrets of the Mesopotamian scribes remained utterly silent, locked inside the strange, wedge-shaped symbols covering the thousands of clay tablets piling up in the collections of European museums. These artifacts were puzzles without a key, their messages as inaccessible as if they had arrived from another planet. Scholars could see the intricate markings, could even sense their importance, but the language of cuneiform was a fortress they could not breach. The dramatic breakthrough came not from a single moment of genius, but through the relentless, painstaking work of a handful of determined linguists, most famously Henry Rawlinson. His story reads like an adventure novel. He scaled the treacherous cliff face at Behistun in Persia, where a massive trilingual inscription carved in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian had been commissioned by King Darius centuries before. Dangling from ropes, Rawlinson and his team risked their lives to meticulously create papier-mâché casts of the text, letter by letter. This monumental inscription became the Rosetta Stone of cuneiform, providing the same text in 3 different languages and finally giving scholars the comparative tool they needed to crack the code. It was a slow, grueling process of cross-referencing and deduction, but gradually the symbols began to yield their meanings, and the fortress walls of this ancient language began to crumble. The initial translations were earth-shattering. They revealed epic poetry like the Epic of Gilgamesh, legal codes like that of Hammurabi, and vast administrative records. But for historians of science, the real treasure was the slow realization that a significant portion of these tablets were not literature or law, but something far more revolutionary: scientific documents. Here were star catalogs, mathematical problem sets with solutions, and detailed calendars that plotted the year with a precision no one had thought possible for such an ancient era. The decipherment revealed that the Greeks, long credited as the fathers of astronomy and mathematics, were in fact standing on the shoulders of giants. These clay tablets were the textbooks and lab notebooks of a sophisticated scientific tradition that had been flourishing for over a millennium before the rise of Athens. The process of translation transformed our understanding of human history, proving that the drive for empirical observation and mathematical prediction was not a European invention, but a fundamental human impulse that had found one of its earliest and most powerful expressions in the Middle East. Today, the work of understanding these tablets has entered a thrilling new phase, propelled by technology that would seem like pure magic to the 19th century pioneers. Modern scholars are no longer limited to what they can see with the naked eye. They now employ advanced spectral imaging techniques, essentially cameras that can see in wavelengths far beyond the visible light spectrum. A tablet that appears worn, damaged, or even blank to us can, under infrared or ultraviolet light, reveal crisp, clear writing that has been hidden for centuries. Three-dimensional scanning creates incredibly detailed digital models of each artifact, allowing researchers to study the depth and angle of each wedge impression from every conceivable angle on a computer screen, often revealing the specific style of the scribe or corrections they made. These digital surrogates are also a powerful conservation tool. preserving the information contained on the tablets against the very real threats of war, looting, or environmental decay, ensuring that this knowledge is safeguarded for future generations. But the technological revolution goes beyond mere preservation. We are now in the era of big data for ancient texts. Projects are underway to scan and digitize hundreds of thousands of these tablets, creating massive, searchable online databases. This allows scholars to perform a kind of textual analysis that was previously impossible. They can now track the evolution of specific astronomical terms across centuries, or use data mining algorithms to identify previously overlooked patterns in weather observations or commodity prices that were recorded alongside celestial events. This is turning the scattered corpus of cuneiform tablets from a collection of individual artifacts into a single, vast dataset, a collective memory bank of an entire civilization. Researchers can ask questions of this data that the original scribes might never have considered, uncovering hidden connections and correlations that deepen our understanding of how they saw the relationship between the heavens, the earth, and their society. This ancient work on pattern recognition is finding startlingly relevant applications in our modern world. The fundamental challenge faced by the Babylonian astronomers, sifting through immense amounts of noisy, complex data to find reliable, predictive patterns, is the same challenge at the heart of modern data science and artificial intelligence. Their methods, encoded in step-by-step procedural texts on clay, were essentially early algorithms. When a Babylonian scholar used past records of lunar eclipses to predict future ones, he was employing a primitive form of machine learning, training his model on historical data to forecast new outcomes. Modern researchers are now looking to these ancient systems not for their specific astronomical predictions, but for their conceptual frameworks. In a world increasingly dependent on algorithms that can seem like incomprehensible black boxes, the elegant, arithmetical logic of the Babylonians offers a model of transparency and simplicity. Their work demonstrates the incredible power of long-term, systematic data collection, a lesson that resonates deeply in our era of climate science and demographic studies. The clay tablets, therefore, are not just historical relics, they are foundational texts in the history of information science, and their rediscovery continues to inspire new ways of thinking about our oldest human quest, to use the patterns of the past to navigate the uncertainty of the future. But these revolutionary ideas about time were never meant to stay within the mud brick walls of Mesopotamian cities. Knowledge, much like the precious goods of lapis lazuli and spices, became a coveted commodity itself, traveling along the same winding trade routes that connected the ancient world. The most famous of these, the Silk Road, was not a single path but a vast, sprawling network of overland trails and sea lanes, a circulatory system for commerce, culture, and, crucially, concepts. For centuries, caravans of camels and ships laden with silk and silver did more than just transport material wealth. They carried the intellectual wealth of entire civilizations in the minds of the people who traveled with them. Imagine a Babylonian scholar, perhaps attached to the royal court, being sent as part of a diplomatic mission to the rising power of the Persian Empire. In his baggage, alongside official gifts, he might carry a few small, carefully wrapped clay tablets, not epic poems, but technical documents. These could be astronomical tables or perhaps the mathematical formulas for predicting a lunar eclipse. During the long months of travel, he would converse with his counterparts from other lands. Around a campfire under the clear desert sky, he might explain his people's base 60 system to an Indian mathematician, who in turn would share his own civilization's sophisticated advancements in arithmetic and geometry. Later, in a Persian court, he might demonstrate the Babylonian Zodiac to local astrologers, who would immediately see its potential and begin adapting its 12 signs to their own celestial myths and deities. These interactions were not formal academic conferences. They were the organic, often serendipitous, cross-pollination of ideas that happened when curious minds from different cultures were thrown together by the necessities of trade and diplomacy. This flow of knowledge was never a simple one-way street. It was a complex, multi-directional exchange where every culture was both a teacher and a student. We have tangible evidence of this in the historical record. The Greeks openly credited the Babylonians with their astronomical data. Later, Indian astronomy reveals clear influences from both Greek and Mesopotamian sources, incorporating concepts like the Zodiac while developing their own unique and highly accurate calendrical systems. In China, astronomers, operating independently for millennia with their own rich tradition of celestial observation, still benefited from the influx of ideas along the Silk Road. While they maintained their own system of dividing the sky into constellations and their own lunisolar calendar, knowledge of Western methods likely provided valuable comparative data and alternative approaches to solving universal problems like eclipse prediction. The exchange wasn't about who invented what first. It was about providing different pieces of a grand puzzle, allowing each civilization to build a more complete and accurate picture of the cosmos than they could have alone. The humble clay tablet itself became a passport for these ideas. Cuneiform tablets have been found far outside the borders of Mesopotamia, in places like the ancient Egyptian city of Amarna and in the ruins of Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey. These weren't just stray objects lost by a traveler. They were part of formal diplomatic archives, proving that kings and pharaohs were actively corresponding about and exchanging scientific knowledge. A letter from one ruler to another might request the services of a skilled astronomer or ask for the latest celestial omens observed in the sender's land. In this way, the networks of political alliance became conduits for intellectual exchange, with the clay tablet serving as the durable, portable medium that could survive the long and arduous journey between capitals. This profound interconnectedness challenges the modern notion of ancient civilizations as isolated, independent entities. It reveals a world that was, in many ways, as globally connected as our own, albeit at a slower pace. A new mathematical concept developed in Europe could, within a few generations, be influencing the calendar reforms of a Chinese emperor. An astronomical observation recorded in Babylon could provide a key data point for a Greek philosopher theorizing about the nature of the solar system. This was humanity's first great period of scientific globalization, demonstrating that the pursuit of knowledge has always transcended borders. The story of ancient timekeeping is not a series of separate, parallel inventions, but a single, woven tapestry of human curiosity, with threads of insight passed from hand to hand and culture to culture along the great trade routes of the ancient world, forever linking the fates of empires through their shared desire to understand the turning of the heavens. This meticulous work of tracking the stars and harmonizing calendars did more than just schedule planting or predict floods. It forced the ancient Mesopotamians to confront one of the most profound questions a civilization can ask: what is the fundamental nature of time itself? Their daily observations presented them with a powerful paradox. On one hand, they saw undeniable, repeating cycles everywhere they looked. The moon died and was reborn every month. The sun rose and set without fail. The seasons turned in an endless, predictable loop of planting, growth, harvest, and rest. This view suggested a cyclical model of time, a great wheel forever turning, where everything that had happened would, in some form, happen again. This concept was deeply comforting, embedding a sense of eternal return and cosmic order into their worldview. Yet their own records told another story simultaneously. The clay tablets themselves were linear artifacts. They were lists, chronicles, and diaries that recorded unique events in an irreversible sequence. The reign of a king had a definite beginning and an end. A specific, unusually devastating flood occurred in one particular year and not another. The very act of writing history, of inscribing that this eclipse happened here and that conquest happened there, created a timeline, a one-way arrow of progression from the past into the future. This introduced a competing, linear concept of time, where history was a unique, unfolding narrative rather than an endless repetition. They lived in the tension between these two ideas, sensing that time was both a cycle and a line, a concept that modern physics is still grappling with today. This philosophical wrestling match had direct consequences for how they understood human agency. If time is a perfect, predetermined cycle, then is the future already written? Does the predictable return of the planet Venus or the inevitable recurrence of an eclipse mean that human destiny is equally fated? This line of thinking led to a strong belief in celestial omens, the idea that the gods had placed a divine script in the stars that could be read by skilled interpreters to foretell events on Earth. The king's actions were often guided by these astrological forecasts, suggesting a universe governed by a preordained cosmic order where free will was an illusion. But there was a crucial caveat embedded in their belief system. An omen was not an unchangeable verdict, it was a warning. If the stars foretold a coming plague or a military defeat, the appropriate rituals, prayers, and sacrifices could potentially appease the gods and avert the disaster. This introduces a fascinating loophole, a blend of determinism and free will. The future might be suggested by the heavens, but it was not entirely fixed. Human action could still intervene and change the outcome. This created a dynamic relationship with time, where it was both a predetermined cycle and a malleable path that could be influenced through piety and correct action. They were not passive victims of fate but active participants in a divine negotiation, using their knowledge of time's patterns to steer their collective destiny toward a more favorable result. These early metaphysical inquiries, preserved on those fragile clay tablets, were the first stirrings of a philosophical tradition that would eventually flower in ancient Greece. When Greek thinkers began to debate the nature of the universe, they were not starting from scratch. They were building upon a foundation of Babylonian thought that had filtered into the Mediterranean world through trade and cultural exchange. The Mesopotamian struggle to reconcile cyclical and linear time directly prefigures the famous Greek paradoxes of change and permanence explored by philosophers like Heraclitus and Parmenides. The questions about fate and free will that are central to Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex have their roots in the omen literature of Nineveh and Babylon. The effort to track time meticulously, born from practical necessity, unexpectedly became the cradle of abstract thought, proving that the deepest reflections on human existence often begin not in the abstract, but in the utterly practical need to know when to plant the seeds. When we picture the ancient astronomer, we often imagine a bearded sage perched atop a ziggurat, a solitary figure gazing at the stars. This image, while dramatic, is incomplete. It overlooks a vital group of contributors whose roles were often hidden within the inner sanctums of temple life: women. In the rigidly hierarchical societies of Mesopotamia, where most professions were dominated by men, there existed exceptional pathways to power and knowledge for women, particularly within the religious sphere. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a bustling economic, administrative, and intellectual hub, and high-ranking priestesses held significant sway within its walls. Some of the most powerful figures in Mesopotamian history were women, like the priestesses of who commanded vast estates, managed complex commercial enterprises, and wielded influence that rivaled that of kings. Their duties extended far beyond the spiritual. They were central to the economic and scholarly life of the city, and this included the meticulous keeping of sacred time. Within these temple complexes, the calendar was the beating heart that synchronized all activity, from the daily offerings to the grandest annual festivals. The timing of these rituals was everything, a matter of maintaining cosmic order and divine favor. It is here that we find evidence of women's direct involvement in timekeeping. Certain priestesses held titles and responsibilities that were intrinsically linked to the lunar cycle and the celestial schedule. For instance, the high priestess of the moon god Nana at would have been intimately involved in the rituals marking the first sighting of the new moon crescent, the event that officially began each month. Her role would require a sophisticated understanding of the lunar calendar to ensure these critical ceremonies were performed at the exact, auspicious moment. She wasn't merely a participant in a ritual designed by men. She was a custodian of the schedule itself, a key actor in the dialogue between the city and its gods. Beyond these high-profile roles, there is compelling evidence that women also worked as scribes within the temple and palace schools, the very institutions where astronomical knowledge was recorded and preserved. While the majority of scribes were male, cuneiform tablets from the city of Sippar, a major center for the worship of the sun god Shamash, revealed the existence of a thriving community of female scribes associated with the temple. These women, often from elite families, were literate and highly educated. They managed the temple's vast archives, which would have included economic records, legal documents, and crucially, the astronomical diaries and ritual calendars that guided the city's life. By copying and maintaining these texts, they played an indispensable role in preserving the long-term data that was the foundation of Babylonian predictive astronomy. Their careful, exacting work ensured that the observations of one generation were accurately passed down to the next, creating the continuous thread of data that allowed for the discovery of cycles like the Saros. Uncovering these stories requires reading between the lines of history, looking for the subtle clues left behind in the clay. One of the most direct pieces of evidence comes from the famous Venus tablet of Amasajuka. While the tablet itself doesn't name its author, the long-term observations it contains span decades, suggesting the work was maintained across generations by a school of astronomers, a school that likely included both men and women attached to the temple. Other legal and economic tablets mention women overseeing large groups of workers whose labor was scheduled according to the agricultural calendar, implying a necessary familiarity with that system. Personal seals belonging to women have been found on administrative documents, proving their authority in managing resources and schedules. Furthermore, in the realm of divination, which was deeply intertwined with astronomy, women often served as dream interpreters and omen readers, roles that required them to understand the timing and significance of celestial events within the broader tapestry of signs believed to be sent by the gods. Acknowledging these contributions fundamentally changes our understanding of ancient science. It moves us away from the myth of the lone male genius and toward a more collaborative, institutional model of knowledge production. The development of timekeeping was not a solitary pursuit but a societal effort, one that leveraged the skills and perspectives of its entire educated class, regardless of gender. By overlooking women's roles, we have historically presented a flattened, incomplete picture of how this crucial technology evolved. Recognizing the priestesses and scribes of Mesopotamia adds crucial depth and color to our historical narrative, reminding us that the human quest to understand time was a tapestry woven from many different threads. Their story is a testament to the fact that even within the most structured ancient societies, the drive for knowledge and the responsibility of maintaining cosmic order could provide women with a path to influence and intellectual achievement, ensuring their quiet but essential voices were part of the conversation that ultimately rewired all of humanity's relationship with the future. This deep connection between the stars and stories meant that the very fabric of time was woven into the identity of their gods. The sun was not just a ball of fire, it was the god Utu or Shamash, a divine judge who traversed the sky each day, seeing all things and bringing light and justice to the world. His daily journey from east to west was the ultimate marker of time, a narrative that played out every single day. The moon was not a rocky satellite, it was the god Nana or Sin, a wise and measured deity whose cyclical death and rebirth defined the month. His waxing and waning was a story of descent into the underworld and triumphant return, a celestial drama that gave rhythm to human life. Even the planet Venus was the fiery and unpredictable goddess Inanna or Ishtar, whose movements from evening star to morning star were interpreted as her journeys between the realms of heaven and the underworld, tales of love, war, and transformation that were directly linked to her changing position in the sky. By attributing the mechanics of time to the actions of these powerful, personality-driven deities, the Babylonians transformed cold, impersonal astronomy into a relatable, emotional epic. The predictable movement of the heavens was not just physics, it was the daily activity of the gods, a mythic narrative written across the sky for all to see. This fusion is brilliantly illustrated in the world's oldest surviving great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story of the arrogant king's quest for immortality is on a deeper level, a profound meditation on time and humanity's place within it. Gilgamesh's entire journey is framed by celestial and temporal imagery. After the death of his friend Enkidu, a grief-stricken Gilgamesh sets out to find Utanapishti, the Mesopotamian Noah who was granted eternal life by the gods. His path leads him through the tunnel of the sun, the dark passage the sun god takes each night to return to the east, a place that exists outside of normal time. When he finally finds Utanapishti, the immortal sage delivers the epic's central lesson about time's inevitability. He challenges Gilgamesh to a simple test: stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh immediately fails, falling into a deep sleep, and upon waking, he is surrounded by loaves of bread Utanapishti's wife has baked, each one marking a day that has passed. This is a powerful metaphor for time's relentless, unconscious passage. The story uses the most fundamental unit of time, the day, to demonstrate that even a mighty king cannot defeat sleep, the brother of death, and he certainly cannot halt the progression of days. The epic concludes not with triumph over mortality, but with a bittersweet acceptance of time's limits and a celebration of the lasting, human-scale immortality found in building a great city and having one's name remembered. It is a literary masterpiece that uses narrative to explore the same existential questions their astronomers were asking with math. What does it mean to be a mortal being in a universe of eternal, repeating cycles? Beyond grand epics, this narrative approach was a primary tool for encoding and transmitting practical timekeeping knowledge itself. Complex astronomical concepts were often embedded within creation myths, making them easier to remember and pass down through oral tradition before being committed to clay. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, is far more than a story of the god Marduk's victory over the chaos monster Tiamat. It is a cosmological blueprint. When Marduk creates the world from Tiamat's divided body, he doesn't stop there. He then establishes the celestial order, fixing the stars and planets in their places, defining the yearly course of the sun, and commanding the moon god to mark the months through his phases. The text explicitly states that Marduk founded the stations of the great gods and set up the constellations, effectively providing a divine mandate and explanation for the astronomical patterns the scribes were observing. This myth didn't just explain where the world came from, it explained why the calendar worked. It rooted the scientific practice of timekeeping in sacred narrative, ensuring that every priest and scribe who learned the story also internalized the fundamental order of the cosmos. The rhythm of the festivals that celebrated this creation story throughout the year further reinforced the calendar, weaving the myth and the practical measurement of time into the very rhythm of daily life. This powerful legacy of blending story and science did not end with Mesopotamia. The tradition traveled, influencing the mythological frameworks of neighboring cultures. The Greek conception of time itself was personified in their mythology. Kronos was the primordial god of time, often depicted as an old, wise man, while the seasons were represented by the Horai, goddesses who controlled the orderly progression of the natural world. The familiar myths of figures like Orion the hunter placed in the stars, or the story of Helios driving the sun chariot across the sky, are clear descendants of the Mesopotamian tradition of populating the heavens with divine narratives. This approach ensured the survival of this knowledge. A dry list of astronomical observations might have been lost or ignored, but a captivating story about a goddess's journey or a hero's fate was retold for generations, carrying the essential understanding of celestial patterns within it. The clay tablets that preserve these myths are therefore far more than literary curiosities. They are the proof of a sophisticated intellectual tradition that understood the best way to preserve a complex truth was not to simply record it, but to weave it into a story that the human heart would never forget. While the scribes of Mesopotamia were pressing the movements of Venus into clay on the other side of the world, in the court of the Shang dynasty kings in ancient China, a different kind of oracle was at work. Here, the primary medium for communicating with the divine and recording celestial events was not clay but bones, specifically the shoulder bones of oxen and the plastrons of turtles. These oracle bones, as they are known today, were used in a practice called pyromancy. A diviner would apply a hot metal rod to a prepared hollow in the bone, causing it to crack with a series of sharp pops. The pattern of these cracks was then interpreted as an answer from the ancestral spirits to a question posed by the king. The question, the answer, and often the eventual outcome were all meticulously carved into the bone itself. Among these inquiries, we find some of the earliest Chinese astronomical records, questions about the meaning of a sudden comet, the significance of a lunar eclipse, or the appearance of a strange new star. This was timekeeping deeply fused with divination, where understanding celestial events was about averting disaster and securing the mandate of heaven for the ruler. The oracle bone was both a ritual object and a historical document, a permanent, inscribed record of a moment when the human world sought to align itself with the perceived order of the cosmos, demonstrating that the impulse to track and interpret time was a global phenomenon, even if the tools were profoundly different. Far away in the high Andes of South America, the Inca civilization faced a different set of challenges and developed a breathtakingly physical solution. Without a written language as we know it, and in an environment where towering mountains and deep valleys created a complex relationship with the horizon, the Inca became masters of architectural astronomy. Their most famous timekeeping instruments were not portable tablets or bones, but immense, immovable stone structures intricately carved into the living bedrock of their sacred sites. The most iconic of these is the Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu, often called the hitching post of the sun. This elegantly carved granite pillar stands at the center of a ceremonial platform. During the solstices, the sun strikes the stone in such a way that it casts no shadow at noon, appearing to be literally hitched to the rock in its journey across the sky. This precise alignment allowed Inca priests to determine the exact dates of the solstices, critical events in their agricultural and ceremonial calendar. Similar solar observatories exist throughout the Inca Empire, like the Temple of the Sun in Cusco, where windows and niches are perfectly aligned to capture the sunrise on specific days of the year. Their method was one of embodied experience and monumental architecture. Instead of recording data on a tablet to be read, they built a landscape that itself became the calendar, a stone clock one could walk through and witness with one's own eyes. This comparison across continents reveals a stunning universality of purpose. Whether in Mesopotamia, China, or the Andes, ancient civilizations shared a powerful, non-negotiable need to predict the seasons for agriculture, to schedule religious ceremonies that maintained cosmic order, and to legitimize the rule of their leaders by demonstrating a special connection to the heavens. The drive to measure time was as fundamental as the drive to build shelters or find food, yet the methods they invented could not have been more distinct. This diversity is a powerful testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. Each culture used the materials and responded to the environmental pressures most readily available to them. The Mesopotamians had an abundance of river clay and a need for detailed, reproducible records that could be stored in library archives. The Shang dynasty Chinese had a long tradition of ancestral veneration and pyromancy, naturally leading to the use of bone. The Inca, living in a world of epic stone mountains, became unparalleled stonemasons who integrated their astronomy directly into their architecture and their breathtaking landscape. These different approaches also created different kinds of knowledge. The Babylonian clay tablet tradition, with its focus on long-term data collection and mathematical modeling, led to predictive, quantitative astronomy. They could calculate the future position of a planet. The Inca method, by contrast, was profoundly qualitative and experiential. It was about witnessing a specific, awe-inspiring event, the sun hitching itself to the Intihuatana on the shortest day of the year, and using that moment to mark a point in the cyclical rhythm of life. One system produced algorithms, the other produced sacred spectacle. Neither was superior. They were perfectly tailored solutions to the specific cultural and environmental contexts that created them. This global perspective teaches us that innovation is never a single, linear path. It is a brilliant, branching tree of human creativity, with different cultures finding their own unique way to solve the same fundamental problems. The story of ancient timekeeping is not a hierarchy with one civilization at the top, but a rich tapestry of parallel inventions, each thread showcasing a different facet of our species' relentless curiosity and its profound desire to find our place within the vast, turning mechanism of time. It's a profound irony that the very quality which preserved these tablets for millennia, their incredible durability, now makes them so vulnerable. Clay is remarkably resilient. It doesn't rot like paper or corrode like metal. A fired tablet can survive intact in the dry, stable environment of the desert for thousands of years, which is why we have so many of them. But the moment it is disturbed, its greatest weakness is exposed. It is brittle. A single careless touch, a sudden change in temperature or humidity, or even a minor seismic tremor can cause an irreplaceable artifact to shatter into fragments, potentially scattering a unique historical record across the floor of a museum basement. The process of excavation itself, no matter how careful, is an inherently violent transition from a stable, protected environment underground to the variable and often harsh conditions of the surface world. Early archaeologists in the 19th century, driven by a race for treasures and spectacular finds, often used methods we would consider brutally destructive today. They would sometimes use pickaxes to break into ancient library rooms, potentially pulverizing tablets in the process, or clean them with harsh chemicals and wire brushes that erased faint cuneiform signs forever. Even today, with the most meticulous modern techniques, the act of unearthing a tablet is a moment of immense risk, a transfer from a state of long-term preservation to one of immediate and perpetual fragility. Once a tablet is exposed, a new set of environmental enemies begins its assault. The most insidious is humidity. A tablet that has been baked bone dry for 3,000 years is like a sponge. If the air is too moist, it will eagerly absorb that moisture, which can cause soluble salts within the clay to migrate to the surface and crystallize. These tiny, expanding crystals literally push the surface of the tablet off, a process called spalling, which flakes away the inscribed surface and obliterates the writing forever. Conversely, if the air is too dry, the clay can become overly desiccated and crack. Temperature fluctuations cause the clay to expand and contract minutely, creating stress fractures over time. Light, especially the ultraviolet rays in sunlight or even from harsh museum lighting, can fade the surface and make the inscriptions harder to read. Then there are the human threats: poor handling, inadequate storage where tablets can rub against each other and cause abrasions, and the constant risk of being dropped. Each tablet is a unique page from a library with no duplicates, and every scratch or chip represents a permanent loss of information, a sentence ripped from the book of human history. Perhaps the most heartbreaking threat is one that is entirely modern: conflict and political instability. The heartland of these ancient civilizations, modern-day Iraq and Syria, has been a region of devastating wars and unrest for decades. Museums and archaeological sites have not been spared. During the Iraq War, the National Museum in Baghdad was tragically looted in 2003, and thousands of artifacts, including countless cuneiform tablets, were stolen, smashed, or simply vanished into the illicit antiquities trade. More recently, the intentional destruction of cultural heritage by extremist groups has shown a terrifying disregard for this shared human history, with ancient sites like Nimrud being deliberately bulldozed. Even when tablets are not directly targeted, the collapse of infrastructure during conflict means climate control systems in museums fail, storage facilities are damaged, and the organized, careful work of conservation grinds to a halt. A tablet can survive 1,000 years in the ground only to be destroyed in a single afternoon of shelling or looting, a loss that echoes across centuries. Faced with these multifaceted threats, a global community of conservators, archaeologists, and historians is engaged in a quiet, high-stakes race against time to protect what remains. The first line of defense is always the environment. Museums that house these collections, like the British Museum or the Louvre, keep their tablets in specially designed rooms with rigorously controlled climates: constant, low humidity, stable cool temperatures, and minimal light exposure. They are stored in custom-made cushioned boxes or drawers that prevent any movement or contact, but the most exciting advancements are technological. The use of three-dimensional scanning has been nothing short of a revolution. Specialists can now create incredibly high-resolution digital models of a tablet's surface, capturing every minute wedge impression in perfect detail. This does several miraculous things at once. First, it creates a perfect digital backup. Even if the physical tablet is lost, the information it contains is saved forever. Second, these digital models can be manipulated on a screen light, can be raked across the surface from different angles to highlight faint inscriptions that are invisible to the naked eye. Scholars can now unwrap a digitally scanned clay envelope without ever breaking the ancient seal inside. Most powerfully, These scans can be shared instantly with researchers anywhere in the world, democratizing access to these precious artifacts and allowing a Sumerian scholar in Texas to study a tablet held in Berlin without it ever leaving its climate-controlled vault. These conservation efforts are about far more than just preserving interesting old objects. They are a fundamental acknowledgement of the clay tablet's role as a primary witness to the birth of human civilization. Every tablet that is saved, every inscription that is digitally preserved, is another piece of the puzzle in our collective origin story. It's a safeguard against historical amnesia, ensuring that the secrets of ancient timekeeping, law, literature, and daily life remain alive and accessible. These initiatives represent a pact between the past and the future, a promise that the intellectual triumphs of the world's first scientists and scribes will continue to inform and inspire new generations of scholars and enthusiasts, keeping the dialogue between millennia open and the story of our shared humanity forever unfolding. The relentless human drive to measure time with ever greater accuracy did not end with the water clock or the astrolabe. It simply found new, more powerful expressions. If a Babylonian priest were to be transported to a modern time lab, his mind would be utterly bewildered by the sights and sounds, yet he would instantly recognize the core mission. He would see scientists not gazing at the stars, but monitoring the hyper-stable oscillations of atoms, using the immutable laws of quantum mechanics to define the second itself. The ancient goal remains perfectly unchanged: to find the most reliable, repeating pulse in the universe and use it to build a scaffold for human existence. Our tools have evolved from tracking the wanderings of Venus to trapping cesium atoms in electromagnetic fields and counting their vibrations. An atomic clock doesn't measure the passing of days. It counts the passage of over 9 billion oscillations of a cesium atom to define a single second, a unit of time so precise that it would take tens of millions of years for two such clocks to disagree by even a single second. This staggering precision is no longer locked away in a laboratory. It is woven into the very fabric of our daily lives through the satellite-based system known as the Global Positioning System. Every time your phone pinpoints your location on a map, it is performing a breathtaking feat of nanosecond timekeeping. GPS satellites each carry multiple atomic clocks, constantly broadcasting their incredibly precise time and their orbital position. Your phone receives these signals from several satellites at once. Because the signals travel at the speed of light, even a microsecond of error in timing would translate into a massive error in positioning on the ground. Your device calculates the minuscule differences in how long each signal took to arrive, and through this triangulation of time, it can determine your location within a few meters. This entire global infrastructure, which guides everything from aviation and shipping to your drive to the grocery store, is fundamentally a network of synchronized clocks, a direct technological descendant of the ancient need to know where you are in the world by knowing precisely what time it is. And the quest continues to push the boundaries even further into the strange and counterintuitive realm of quantum timekeeping. The next generation of clocks under development uses optical lattices to trap strontium or ytterbium atoms, measuring oscillations of light rather than microwaves. These optical clocks are so phenomenally precise that they are sensitive to the most subtle distortions of spacetime itself, predicted by Einstein's theory of general relativity. They can detect a difference in the passage of time between the clock at the top of a skyscraper and one in the basement, where gravity is very slightly stronger. This isn't just an academic curiosity. It opens up revolutionary new applications, from creating ultra-precise gravitational maps that can monitor underground water aquifers or magma flows beneath volcanoes, to testing the fundamental constants of the universe to see if they are truly constant over billions of years. We are entering an era where timekeeping devices are becoming tools to probe the deepest mysteries of physics, transforming from mere measures of duration into scientific instruments that can sense the shape of the world itself. Artificial intelligence is now being integrated into this ancient pursuit, acting as the modern counterpart to the Babylonian scribe who painstakingly looked for patterns in eclipse records. AI algorithms are being set to work on vast datasets from these new clocks, searching for minuscule anomalies or long-term drifts that might indicate new physical phenomena or further refinements to our models. They can manage the mind-boggling complexity of keeping thousands of optical lattice atoms coherent long enough to take a measurement, optimizing processes in real time that are far too complex for human intervention. This partnership between human curiosity, quantum hardware, and machine learning represents the latest chapter in the story, a fusion of our oldest intellectual drive with our most advanced technologies. The clay tablets were the first databases, the atomic clock is the ultimate sensor, and AI is the newest pattern recognition tool, all working in concert toward the same eternal goal. This unbroken thread, stretching from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the quantum labs of today, is a powerful testament to humanity's enduring desire to not just observe time, but to truly understand it, master it, and use its rhythms to navigate an increasingly complex world. But the true magic of these ancient systems isn't just in their historical significance, it's in their remarkable power to teach us how to think. In an age of information overload and instant digital answers, the story of the Babylonian astronomer offers a profound lesson in patience and focus. Imagine the discipline required to stand on a ziggurat night after night, year after year, simply watching and recording with no guarantee of an immediate payoff. This was science in its purest form, a slow, meticulous accumulation of data points, driven by the faith that patterns would eventually emerge from the chaos. For a modern student accustomed to quick Google searches, this process teaches the irreplaceable value of primary observation, of learning to see the world for yourself rather than simply accepting a pre-digested fact. It demonstrates that deep understanding isn't always instantaneous. It's often the hard-won reward for sustained attention and curiosity. By studying their methods, we learn to appreciate the journey of discovery itself, not just the final result. This approach naturally fosters a deeply interdisciplinary mindset, something modern education strives desperately to achieve. A single clay tablet is not just an astronomy text, it's a fusion of mathematics, mythology, linguistics, and art. To fully understand it, you cannot stay within the silo of a single subject. You need math to decipher the base 60 calculations, astronomy to comprehend the planetary movements, history to place it within the reign of a specific king, and literature to interpret the poetic names of the constellations. A teacher can use one artifact to launch a dozen different lessons, showing students how knowledge is inherently connected. A math class can explore the elegance of the base 60 system and why it's still used for time and circles today. A literature class can analyze the Epic of Gilgamesh as a meditation on mortality and time. An art class can try their hand at pressing cuneiform into clay, understanding the physicality of ancient writing. This holistic approach mirrors the real world, where complex problems rarely have single-discipline solutions, and it empowers students to become more versatile and creative thinkers. Perhaps the most humbling and inspiring lesson is the perspective it provides on our own place in the long arc of human innovation. We often look at our smartphones and smartwatches and feel a sense of overwhelming technological superiority. But studying these clay tablets reframes that achievement. It doesn't diminish our accomplishments. Instead, it connects us to the countless generations of curious minds that made them possible. Every time we check a digital calendar, we are using a concept refined over millennia. The GPS that guides us is a direct descendant of the ancient desire to navigate by the stars. This understanding cultivates a powerful sense of gratitude and connection, replacing a narrative of isolated genius with one of collective, cumulative effort. It shows students that they are part of a long chain of inquiry, and that their own curiosity and questions are a valuable continuation of this timeless human project. Ultimately, these ancient artifacts are more than just teaching tools. They are gateways to cultivating a specific mindset, one of resilience, pattern recognition, and humble curiosity. They teach us that innovation often comes from carefully observing the natural world and looking for the rhythms hidden within it. They show that the most enduring technologies are often those that solve fundamental human needs, like knowing when to plant food or how to organize a society. And most importantly, they inspire a sense of wonder. Holding a replica of a 4,000-year-old tablet, knowing it represents humanity's first successful attempt to predict an eclipse, is a thrilling experience. It makes the past immediate and relevant, proving that the drive to understand the universe and our place within it is the most human project of all, one that continues to unfold with every new discovery and every child who looks up at the night sky and asks, why? These clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia are far more than just relics of a bygone era. They are powerful symbols of humanity's unyielding drive to understand the world around us and to reach into the unknown with both hands. Every careful observation of Venus, every calculated prediction of an eclipse, every intercalated month was a declaration that the future was not a realm of pure mystery, but a landscape that could be mapped, understood, and ultimately shaped. This shift in consciousness, from passively accepting the passage of days to actively measuring and anticipating them, represents one of the most profound cognitive revolutions in our entire history. It rewired the human brain to think in terms of cycles and seasons, of cause and effect stretched across long arcs of time, laying the essential groundwork for all of modern science, economics, and long-term planning. The legacy of these innovations is not confined to history books. It is embedded in the very structure of our daily lives, in the 60 seconds of every minute and the 365 days of our year, a silent tribute to the first astronomers who dared to track the stars. As we reflect on these monumental achievements, we are reminded that progress is rarely the product of a single lone genius working in isolation. It is almost always the result of collaboration, of knowledge passed down and refined across generations and even across cultures. The story of timekeeping is a tapestry woven from countless threads: the patient observations of Mesopotamian scribes, the solar precision of Egyptian priests, the geometric models of Greek philosophers, and the meticulous record-keeping of medieval monks. Each contributor built upon the foundation laid by those who came before, adding their own unique insights and corrections. This enduring collaboration across centuries underscores a powerful truth: that the pursuit of knowledge is our most enduring shared human project, a conversation that stretches back millennia and one that we are all invited to join. It is a testament to the power of curiosity, perseverance, and our innate desire to leave a mark on the future, ensuring that those who come after us can see a little further and understand a little more. If this journey through the origins of time has sparked your curiosity, if you've enjoyed unraveling the secrets of these ancient tablets and the minds that made them, then consider supporting this channel. Liking this video and subscribing helps immensely in bringing more deep dives into fascinating historical mysteries right to you. We would also love to continue the conversation with you down in the comments. Share your thoughts, your favorite part of the story, or what ancient innovation amazes you the most. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time here today, for lending your curiosity to this story of how we learn to measure our days. May your own future be filled with discovery, and may it always be as bright and full of promise as the stars our ancestors once tracked with such determination and wonder.